Hello friends, hope you're all doing well. BouseFeenux here, and today I wanted to talk about Final Fantasy 15. Now, I originally wasn't going to cover this game outside the little news story I did the other day, but the more I saw on it, the more I wanted to take a look at it for myself, and besides, we get new Final Fantasy iterations so seldomly that they often make video game history, and this is something that I had to experience firsthand, if only to have a small taste of it to say, I was there, I played that. Now, I haven't really played a Final Fantasy game since Final Fantasy IX, unless you count the few hours that I spent in Final Fantasy XIII, but as the title of this video suggests, and as the opening splash screen proudly proclaims, Final Fantasy 15 is a Final Fantasy for fans and first-timers alike, so I figured now was as good a time as any to hop back into the franchise. With that in mind, I wanted to talk about my first hour or so in the game to maybe give you guys some perspective as someone that hasn't touched this IP for over a decade. Moving on, the first thing right out of the gate I noticed was the extremely impressive CGI. Now, Final Fantasy games have always been known for their cutting-edge, graphically fantastic cutscenes, but this looks like something from a high-budget movie. Anymore, with most games nowadays, the pre-rendered cutscenes just seem super tacked on, and they often end up looking worse than the actual game itself. Not in this case. As you can see here, the detail and visual fidelity is absolutely top-notch, and the voice acting is fantastic. I played Final Fantasy 8 and 9 when I was around 10 years old, and if my 10-year-old self could see these cutscenes, he'd probably shit his pants. Not to mention the fact that pre-Final Fantasy X, there was no voice acting in the game. Every line of dialogue was delivered in a speech bubble, and my friends and I had to imagine what every character sounded like. Now, all of that is done for us, and honestly, everything sounds better than I could have ever imagined. Anyway, my trip down memory lane aside, Square Enix does a pretty good job of getting you up to snuff on the game's various combat mechanics. Before you start a new game, they give you the option of going through a very in-depth tutorial. Just make sure you set some time aside for this one because it can get pretty lengthy. You'll learn the basics of combat, how to cast spells, and how to use your teammates effectively in battle. Additionally, there's a lore tutorial that brings you up to speed on the world you're playing in. Now, admittedly, I was pressed for time, so I decided to skip the lore portion for now, but I might go back and check that out. On the topic of combat, though, I'm not really sure if I'm sold on Final Fantasy XV's combat mechanics. I was expecting a little more of a Dark Souls or Devil May Cry approach, but what I got was kind of like someone took the worst parts of both of those and then kind of smashed them together. The control scheme is the absolute worst part about this. It's not very intuitive from what I've seen so far and doesn't seem to mimic what you'd see in your average ARPG, but keep in mind that this game was in development for over 10 years and we've had some major leaps and bounds in terms of combat mechanics and ARPGs in that amount of time. However, if you can master the combat controls and mechanics, it looks like you'll be able to pull off some very satisfying feats and combos. Now, because I always try to say something positive, something I really did like was that the combos you perform are loosely tied to the direction of your right analog stick. For example, pulling it back from your character while he's attacking will typically give you some sort of backstep move, so in that sense, the combat flows really well and it's super intuitive. Everything else just feels a little clunky, but like I said, it's something new and it might take some of us some getting used to. On the other side of things, Final Fantasy games are also beloved platforms for storytelling, and if you listen to the other big reviewers talk about this portion of the game, they'll say it feels a bit shallow and it falls flat in a lot of places. In this regard, I think they've largely missed the point of the story. Let me explain myself here. The story is simple in its plot. You're a young prince destined to marry the princess of a neighboring state to unify the two states, and in order to officiate the wedding, Noctis, the main character, must leave home with his retinue of 3 bodyguards to help guide him to his goal. This is a story as old as time, but from what I can tell so far, I don't feel like that is what they want players to focus on. Essentially, you're on what we call in the US the Great American Road Trip. You've got your bros, you're on your way to meet a girl, and it's not about reaching your destination so much as it is enjoying the journey along the way. It's a rite of passage, it's an opportunity to bond with your friends, and leave it to the Japanese to perfectly capture an American tradition like this in a video game. The real story here is the interaction between these 4 characters. Watching the way these guys enjoy life and enjoy the journey they're on, it makes me feel something I haven't felt in a long time, which is attachment to characters. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this video was how the game handles on the PS4. Final Fantasy XV is a very ambitious title graphically, to say the least, but after playing it a little, I can see the cracks in the PS4's graphical horsepower start to show. The game obviously runs at 30 frames per second, and most of the time you'll get that, but with a wide field of view and some impressive particle effects, you'll notice some frame drops here and there. You can tell they did their best though, and minor frame drops aside, the game looks absolutely gorgeous. So in all, if you're looking for a feel-good experience that provides maybe a tinge of nostalgia, a little bit of wanderlust, and you can get past the slightly wonky combat, I think you'll have a solid experience on your hands that's sure to entertain for hours on end. I'd like to play this game a little more to get a better feel for it and really see if it lives up to my first impressions, but right now, I'm more interested to know what your guys' experience has been like playing this game so far. So if you would, let me know in the comments how it's treating you. That's gonna be all for today though, as we take a quick look at Final Fantasy XV by Square Enix. I hope you all enjoyed this video because I really enjoyed making this one, so if you did, don't forget to leave a like down below because that helps me out a ton here on YouTube. Additionally, consider subscribing to the channel for more video game content, and if you like cooking, check out my other channel, My Shitty Kitchen. Until next time though, I'm BouseFeenux, I'll see you at the next video, and as always, thank you so much for watching.